Good morning. My name is Jeff Kanige. I'm the editor-in-chief of NJBIZ. Welcome to our discussion on opportunity zones. You know, it occurs to me that given the quality of the panel that we have this morning and what I know you're going to hear, I think I can safely declare that this room is an opportunity zone. And our requirements are really simple. All you have to do is show up. So you've all qualified. Congratulations. The reality, of course, is that opportunity zones are much more complex. The government agencies, as we speak, are still refining and writing the rules governing opportunity zones. But there are some things that you need to know right now, and that's what we're going to cover today. Leading our discussion will be Ty Cooper. Ty is the Managing Director for Policy and Advocacy at the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, and she brings a wealth of experience to this role. She was a Deputy Chief Policy Advisor to Governor Phil Murphy. She was the former Chief Policy Advisor to Newark Mayor Ras Baraka. She served as Chief of Staff to Orange Mayor Eldridge Hawkins, and she started her career in government politics as a Senior Project Specialist for Senator Frank Lautenberg. Please welcome Ty Cooper.
I always hate going up the stairs in high heels, so you gotta be careful. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate that warm introduction. So good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So I am incredibly excited, if you cannot tell from the excitement in my voice, because today we're going to discuss one of my favorite topics that has literally taken over my life for the past 2 years now, which is opportunity zones. So we're going to quickly go down and just introduce the panel, then I'm going to give an overview of opportunity zones, and then we're going to get right into the questions and answers. So really glad to have such an esteemed panel, and we'll start with you, Steve.
Good morning. Hopefully you can hear me. So my name is Steve Jones. I am the Government Relations Regional Manager for the International Code Council, which is the organization that writes and promulgates construction codes used throughout the United States and about 55 foreign countries at the moment. My background is I was a municipal code official here in the state of New Jersey for 26 years, handling the communities of Florham Park, Millburn, Short Hills, Madison, and Summit for a while. I also served on my local zoning and planning board for 13 years and also was on the Morris County Planning Board for 6. So I bring a little bit of a background from municipal government to the table today. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Steve. Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure. I've been instructed here to make sure everybody can hear me. I'm with the law firm Sills, Cummis & Gross. I co-chair our corporate practice group, but I've got half my life in real estate. And the reason I have half my life in real estate is because I do quite a bit of fund formation and joint ventures, particularly with real estate. And that brings in a whole host of people from my firm who go from either land use to incentives to leasing to acquisition and disposition and so forth. I've been at this for about 30 years, and Sills Cummis, if you don't know us, I mean, we're Newark-based. We also have an office in Princeton, another office in New York City, and our real estate practice is about 40 lawyers strong. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mark Nicastro. I'm from the accounting firm of Friedman LLP. If you don't know about Friedman, we are one of the top 40 accounting firms in the nation. We're headquartered in New York. But we have offices in East Hanover, Marlton, New Jersey, Linwood, New Jersey, starting something in Red Bank, and we're even in China, believe it or not. We have a huge Chinese practice that's very significant. Happy to be here today. I have over 36 years experience in this business. I was around even when the 1986 Act was passed. And when I went through that, I thought that alone was going to be an act that was like record-setting, and I've never seen anything again like it until, of course, December 22nd of 2017 rolled around, and we are dealing with an act now like I've never seen in 36 years. I mean, we're rolling on 2 years, and we still don't have answers to some questions.
Wait. Save that part for the panel.
It's mind-boggling. It really, really is. Also, I just want to point out that, we have set up things. We were way ahead of this law. We have on your table there, you'll see something that we're running a webinar on June 25th. I'd really encourage anybody to take a look at that. We can talk about that later on in the discussion.
And last but not least.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Eduardo Rodriguez. I'm here from the city of Elizabeth, and I oversee various different departments, planning and zoning, economic development, construction, and HUD entitlement. Prior to working here for City of Elizabeth, I worked 15 years in the real world, as I like to call it, the private sector. And also I have an MBA in the JD, so I think I have a unique perspective of both sides here, the public and the private sector.
Thanks so much. So just really quickly, by a show of hands, how many people are actually familiar with opportunity zones? Okay, so I was going to do an overview, but I may not have to at this point. So we're actually going to jump right into it, right? So there's a lot of excitement happening around opportunity zones right now. There's been huge national convenings. You're hearing about all these funds that are being created. Right now there's about 200 existing funds with commitments. Doesn't mean the money's in the bank, but there's commitments right now. And also there was a huge forum that happened in Newark, New Jersey a couple of weeks ago, hosted by Forbes and the Economic Innovation Group. They brought together really subject matter leaders throughout the nation to talk about the importance of opportunity zones, but more so to make announcements, which is really exciting, and commitments towards cities, and also having the philanthropic community really play a huge role. So we're just going to jump in, because the whole point of opportunity zones, again, from my perspective, really is to drive investments into distressed in rural communities. And this is through the vehicle of opportunity funds. And again, I'm going to have our panel go into a little bit more detail, but essentially, opportunity funds are private sector investment vehicles where you have to invest at least 90% of your capital into opportunity zones, which again are the designated zones that we have. Each governor was allowed to designate a specific amount of zones. In New Jersey, we have 169 census tracts that were designated as opportunity zones. We spread them across the state, so they're in 75 municipalities, and there's one in every single county. And what the governor has really done, and I have to really applaud him, when he came into office, the first thing he did was create an interagency task force because he recognized the importance of what opportunity zones could do statewide, and also that it's really competitive nationwide. So the Economic Development Authority, the New Jersey Redevelopment Authority, the Department of Community Affairs, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Transit are all now working together really to create momentum behind this. And we've also created a one-stop shop and also an asset map, which we're using. But again, the benefit behind this is really for capital gains, right? So we're going to jump into some of the benefits, the pluses and the minuses of opportunity zones. So you guys already introduced yourselves, but can you talk about how you're specifically involved with opportunity zones? And I'll start with Steve.
Sorry.
You, Steve.
Okay.
Oh, Steve J and Steve K. There we go.
Okay.
We should have switched seats earlier.
Okay.
Well, certainly in the municipal government, this is a new concept for a lot of the code officials that are out there, and quite frankly, I don't believe that there's been enough education for those of us that are in the regulatory side of it that have to deal with new developments that are coming in. Unfortunately, even though we are licensed through the Department of Community Affairs, this is not something that we're currently receiving training on, which means for those of you that are going in and trying to invest in these communities that have the opportunity zones, you may be faced with some resistance going in because you're dealing with municipal governments that may not be up to speed as to what it means to have these zones in their community and how you invest and get your projects through the approval process. So it could be an uphill climb, at least in the beginning, until more and more people become accustomed and aware of what's actually out there and how to fund these projects.
Okay, and Steve, I know that you're heading some of these initiatives for Sills Cummis, so what is your touch point or point of entry with opportunity zones?
I would say we're very, very broad-based. Just by way of example, I mean, personally, I've already been involved in closing and funding and starting projects associated with 3 different funds.
That's excellent.
So of the 200 you talked about, we've been very, very involved with that as well. And we can get a little bit more into the details of that later because it gets complicated. But the other thing, too, is the other thing I just want to make sure that everybody understands is, like, it comes from multiple directions, right? There are landowners who are selling their land. There are specific investors. There are developers out here who are looking to sponsor and develop specific projects, which involve them, all of which we've been involved with. In addition, I've met some investment advisors out there who are working with clients who are interested in these areas, and we're working with those investment advisors. So I think the reason why there's so much excitement in here is because it comes from so many different angles and so many different directions, and I think that we've been lucky enough to have been involved with several of those already.
Right, and so part of it is the incentives, right? So there's a temporary deferral, a step up in basis, and a permanent exclusion. And so when people hear that, they get really excited, especially with the permanent exclusion, which means that you're holding your funds in one of these zones for 10 years. Mark, can you talk us through how you're involved in this process and why it's so exciting for your firm?
Oh, absolutely. It is. It's a very exciting new code section that they put in here. And as I started saying early on, they put it in here though, but like most of this law, I'll make this the only comment I promise you about this TCJA that they put together. Worst written tax law ever. Seriously.
Tell them how you really feel.
No, I mean, if you read articles, somebody actually wrote an article, and he's a very well-known man, and he had said this was similar to an 11-year-old sleep-deprived child that wrote this law. I'm not kidding you. It's horrible. And which is why we are sitting here this long afterwards still trying to get clarity around not just the opportunity zone, but around other areas in it. For us and at Friedman, it's exciting because it's very tax-driven, right? Mm-hmm. It's got incentives, as Ty just talked about, that are far beyond what a simple 1031 exchange would do for you. We all know about the 1031 exchanges from the show of hands I saw that are familiar with the opportunity zone. You're talking about a deferral. But this is different. This has a component of not only deferral, but it has exclusions involved with it, right? And the one part that I think is really important that Ty brought up that sometimes is misunderstood is the exemption on the amount that you don't have to pay tax on. So I'm sure people are familiar in the room with the 5-year hold that gets you that 10%, let's call it discount off of the gain.
Are people familiar with this?
Or are we familiar? Should I run through a quick example?
That'd be great, actually. That'd be great.
Yeah, want to do one? Oh, let's do one. So let's say you hold a property in your hands, and your basis in that property is called $1 million. This new opportunity zone, section 1400Z2, yes, I'm a tax geek, a little bit, we'll explain that to you, comes around and you say, well, I can sell this property for $2 million. Well, in that $2 million or that $1 million gain that you're sitting there with, you're able to take that $1 million piece of it and put it into a qualified opportunity fund. We'll probably get into that later, and maybe Steve, who's helped set some of them up, may do it. We'll have a case study in our webinar on that, an exact case study of what we've done. But you take that $1 million and put it into the QOF. If you hold it in there, that $1 million gain automatically will come down by 10%. So now you only have to pay tax on $900,000 of that gain.
And that's if you hold it for how many years?
5 years.
Right.
Okay? If you're brave enough to say that I can tie my capital up, I can tie that $1 million up for another 2 years or 7, you get another 5% kicker on top of that. So now instead of paying tax on $1 million, you're paying tax on $850, right? So pretty big incentive. 1031 doesn't allow that. The other part that this particular opportunity zone allows you is you can take your $1 million worth of basis out. So you don't have to take the $2 million sales, and put the whole $2 million into the QOF. You only need to put the gain into the QOF. So that's a big differential versus a 1031. If you touch the money on a 1031, that was boot. That was taxable. And then the third part, and the part that sometimes confuses people, is the 10-year hold. See, 2026. I don't know. I'm also, besides a tax geek, I'm also a Marvel crazy man. My partners that are in here know that about me. And the last one that came out, all-time grossing movie, was The Endgame, right? The Avengers: The Endgame. There's an Endgame here too, folks. And the Endgame for this opportunity zone is 2026. Okay, that is a very critical day because on 2026 we're paying Uncle Sam for the piece of the gain that we popped into that qualified opportunity fund, right? People are going, well, wait a minute, no. If I hold that 10 years, I don't pay tax on the gain. That's not true. What you don't pay tax on is any appreciation that happened from the time you put the money into the qualified opportunity fund and the growth that would have happened thereafter. Hoping, praying, assuming that there is a gain. And that's been, Ty, for us, the discussions that have really ensued with a lot of our affluent real estate type of investors. It's our largest practice group within our firm, real estate. And, these are smart individuals, and they go back and forth, and they're running the numbers, and they're saying, so if I really go through this, and I get the calculator, and I'm hitting it real quick, they already threw out the number, I'm saving $30,000.
So, Mark, really quickly, before you go into all the details, you're going to go right from tax to the cities, right? So I'd like for Eduardo just to talk about his point of entry into this space and really what cities are doing at this point. So if you want to talk about that, that'd be great.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Our first point after this law passed for the city was really identifying the correct tracks that were going to be feasible for investment. And we went through the complete roster, redevelopment study areas, redevelopment plans that are in place, and really targeted 4 or 5 tracks that we knew would be feasible for development and for investment into those projects. We didn't want to pick zones that were zoned for one-family homes, let's say. So I think that was the biggest point over here for us, was to really identify areas that this would benefit from. And I think that's something most cities should do. We also wanted to make sure that, because the redevelopment process is a long process, we picked areas where redevelopment studies and plans were already in place, so it wouldn't hinder the moving forward, because those things could easily take 7 to 12 months on that.
It's really helpful. And just because we touched on the tax portion, I want to dive a little bit deeper. So we're building a plane and essentially flying it at the same time. That's what it kind of feels like with opportunity zones. The IRS has already released 2 tranches of regulations which really guide the whole process. But even with that, there still remains some ambiguity. So can you talk a little bit about key dates, timelines, the good, the bad, the ugly with this, just with the regulations? And I'll start with Steve K this time.
Okay, well, just to point to your regulations, by the way, the first tranche, this is kind of what Mark was saying, was about 70 plus pages, and the second one was literally about 160 pages. Just so it's a huge amount, to get through. I think, I always say to clients, timing, because I want, and you have to kind of put a little bit of this together, right? So imagine you now have to, so now you got to capitalize your project. But to Eduardo's point, capitalization of a project doesn't happen in just, you don't just throw all your cash in and hope. It happens in pieces, right? First, you might need some money to start getting your entitlement. Then you might need money to start doing your design and engineering. Then you might need to do some money in order to actually start your construction.
Right.
So it happens in tranches. And so the difficulty here is, imagine you're that investor. And now you got to have a capital gain. So you have to, your clients are looking out there saying, whoa, what am I going to sell in order to meet that capital call to get it? So that's challenge number 1 in terms of making sure that your investors actually have access to the capital that's going to be needed to do the project. And that really ties into a lot what Eduardo, I think you're trying to get to, is trying to accelerate these projects, because if you don't, you could really risk, having your investors get tied in knots relative to that first piece of timing, right? Then the second piece of that timing, of course, is exactly what you're talking about, which is we need to accelerate that enough in order to get at least that 5 years, to get in, much less that 7 years. Third piece of timing really hard is it's very difficult to get people to get their arms around maybe that 10-year exit, because why? Yeah. Imagine you're a developer, right? And now you're in it. And I was talking about this with somebody in the audience today and saying, like, well, I'm okay getting my fees. I'm okay getting my development fee. I'm okay maybe getting a property management fee. But the developer really needs to get that exit. And how do I orchestrate that within this 10-year hold? There are ways to do it. We can talk about that more. But so again, what this legislation does is it kind of has this huge overlay about the sort of what I'll call the more normal course timing and capitalization of these. And that becomes very challenging. And imagine this, you're not just one investor. In one of the funds it had 75 investors to try to coordinate all that and make sure that you can work with their timelines. And so again, so the emphasis here, timing.
And are there any key dates, and this is just open to the panel, that people should be aware of? So there clearly is this time reference that we keep on talking about, but are there specific timelines that have come out of the regulations that we want to make sure that the audience and any of their clients know specifically about?
To me
or anybody on the panel?
Well, I think certainly the December 31st, 2026 to be absolutely sure, right? That's because, again, you're going to be paying taxes then if you're in an opportunity zone. The good news is I think that the new recent regulations allow you to hold way past that 10-year period. I think literally into 2040 something actually at this point right now. So that's also good news if for the real long-term holds. So I think that those are the to me, I think that's the real inflection point that's kind of driving this. And I think we were talking earlier, hopefully that may change and we might get a little bit of relief.
We're hoping. So the authors of the legislation, Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey and Senator Tim Scott, are looking at extending the time period from 2026, because right now it's such a truncated period of time. People are finding it really hard to get everything done by that time period. So we're talking a little bit about some of the opportunities, and you're going to hear the word literally opportunity 1,000 times today throughout all these conversations. It comes up over and over and over. But what are some of the benefits to this program, and really what are some of the challenges? I know Mark has acknowledged some of the challenges with the legislation as it's currently drafted, but where are the opportunities in this? People are really excited, really engaged about what this can bring about. So what are some of the opportunities? And I'll leave that over to Mark.
Well, I mean, clearly, from a tax perspective, and just to follow up quickly on what Steve just mentioned, anybody that's going to go into this and think about going into a qualified opportunity fund, you need a whole set of advisors. You need a panel to put it together, because there are so many moving parts that you need to think about that. The accountant's not going to be aware of the zoning side of the things, right? And you're going to need the attorney to help with making sure that if you're going to set your own qualified opportunity fund up, and you can, and quite honestly, in our case study that'll happen in our webinar, that's going to be a real life case study where one of our clients set up their own qualified opportunity fund. So it'll be very detailed. The opportunities for these people, though, are numerous. And if you really go back to, and I was really happy to hear Senator Booker was thinking of extending that, because quite frankly, it needs to be. It was rammed down everyone's throat without no real regulations, and the time's running out. So Stephen's telling you 2026 is a critical date. It's a critical date. 12/31/19, folks.
Yeah.
That is probably a really critical date, because if you're outside of that, you're starting to lose the benefit of that exclusion. Remember, the whole thing's deferred anyway, right? So that's no difference. It's that 5-year period. End of this year, very, very important. And it's going to take, as Eduardo was telling you, it's going to take a while to get things up and moving. So, that's really what it is. But also just, Ty, you mentioned about the second tranche of regs.
Yeah.
Just real quick, one of the things that stood out to me, because some of the clients that we were talking with that are sitting there on big gains, whether or not they should be doing this, start asking questions that weren't covered in the first set of regulations. Like, what if I die? What happens to my gain? What if I want to gift this? I want to gift this to my grandchildren, maybe. I want to push this thing down through the generations. Or what if I want to do it through a grant or a trust? Well, fortunately, the second set of regs actually answered some of those. So what we can tell you is death does not trigger it. So the beneficiary steps into the shoes of the person that put that into the qualified opportunity zone.
Thank you for finding that silver lining right there. So I appreciate that.
Okay, I'll take it away from you, though, because if you give a gift to somebody or even a gift to charity, that triggers the income. So it's one of those rules, it's one of those laws, like many of the things that Congress has put together, that there's the good, there's the bad, and I guess there's the ugly for it, and you really have to be wary.
Really quickly, just turning over to Steve. So we've talked about some of the deadlines, we've talked about timelines. For you, though, and specifically, what are some of the opportunities and the challenges? Because you see this from counties to municipalities, so you recognize where there's a lot of challenges. So what would you say are some of the biggest challenges and also opportunities as well?
I get to see it from the nuts and bolts side of the equation. And for me, there's an incredible opportunity, there's the word again.
I told you.
For revitalizing blighted areas or underutilized areas within communities. You're bringing an influx of finances into a community. You've got small businesses that you're dealing with. You've got a renaissance for areas. The problem is getting people to understand the value of taking the risk and investing in communities and areas that may not be as desirable or potentially desirable as they had been in the past. And this is a huge opportunity for investors to bring back areas by bringing additional economic resources to those communities. So there is an upside to it. It's simply a matter of going through the process and jumping through the hurdles in the beginning. And you are correct. You absolutely need a team to put this together. Right. This is not something that you're going to be able to do overnight. And we'll talk more about that later. But the issue is one of getting the right people in the right seats to move your project forward. And it means having a diverse group of people from a number of different backgrounds that are going to be able to put a package together to get it through a community approval process.
And then on that kind of leads perfectly into the role of cities. While the state government has a role in this, really cities are driving all the efforts behind what's happening. So can you go into detail kind of what Elizabeth is doing to stand out? This is a competitive program, not just within the state of New Jersey, but really nationwide. If you think about the fact that every single governor had the opportunity to designate zones for funds to invest in, that's a pretty big deal. And they're saying the number is $6 trillion available in capital gains. The number's been debated by EIG and others, but such a voluminous amount of money to be invested nationwide. So how are cities like Elizabeth really kind of setting the standard for what should be done?
Sure. Well, again, building off of what Stephen said, I don't think every blighted area is about the same. We did a very thorough analysis and really didn't want to pick areas that the private market would be able to develop all by themselves. Well, we're adjacent to the port over there, and warehousing is booming. Thank you, Amazon, and all the e-commerce. So we picked a couple areas, maybe a little west of there, to maybe build off of that type of warehousing. It was important to us to see areas that could be invested into that wasn't going to scare people off also. So something that's very feasible. Next to the train stations, we designated all those areas around the train stations, especially with the trends now of millennials coming back to the urban areas. So it was really very, like I said, a thorough process and really targeted. We put a lot of time into it because, again, not every tract is the same. And also we coupled that with, if we were going to pick tract 1 or 2, is there a redevelopment study in place? Can we start that process? Because again, if you start it sooner than later, when the money does come in, they can see this project is 50% already there to get the zoning in place, or it's there. There's a redevelopment plan in place. So that's really what we try to do, make it, I guess, more open and easier for that money to come in, because they have been underinvested for the past 30, 40 years. And I think with the economic trends now, this is really both things meeting at the same time.
And I think it's really interesting just with the type of panel we have, right? So you've got city government, you've got attorneys that are really hyper-focused on this representation, also from the councils that you work with. Can you talk specifically from your lens? So you're hearing what cities are doing to prepare, but it's a twofold kind of process. So what, from your end, are you also looking at that cities need to do to be prepared? And I say that objectively because it's one thing being inside the city, knowing how hard you guys are working, but as they're looking to have any of the funds that are being created or their investors to look at your city, what could they be doing to make themselves as competitive? And I'll put that to Steve J, Steve K, and to Mark.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll kick that off. One of the things that you have to be careful of with communities is making sure that their master plans are up to speed and they will approve the work that you're proposing. Quite frankly, communities often fall behind when they're looking at their master plans to determine whether this is something that they're going to be interested in participating in. And I credit Elizabeth for getting ahead of the curve. That's not always the case. There is an awfully long and arduous process to upgrade master plans that don't necessarily take into account these sort of redevelopment opportunities. And by the time you come in with a project and you've selected an area, it may be years before you actually put a shovel in the ground. And when you're talking a timeline that ends potentially in 2026, that's an issue, because it's not uncommon for projects to take years to get out of the ground and get finalized. So
that's really helpful. And then, Steve, as you're helping folks prepare their funds, what type of projects are they looking for? And again, with these cities, what can cities do to work just to make sure that they're prepared and at the table and ready to go?
What I'd like to see, and I think Elizabeth is ahead of the curve, and I think Newark is ahead of the curve. I'm familiar with those two cities pretty well. Is what I would call is like having a development prospectus.
Absolutely.
And I think that, in fact, had an opportunity just to spend a long conference call in a city in California. I won't say what it is, but it rhymes with schmezmo, and won't say it. And they literally just. I just think they were unprepared in the way Elizabeth was. And what I mean by perspective is identifying the tracks, working with the state governments to see what incentive packages, working with the municipalities to see what incentive packages are available. Understanding, again, to your point, the master plan, what kind of development will be available for that, whether it be warehousing, mixed use, residential.
Right.
All that is important. And I think that the towns can drive the value of those areas by literally marketing it in these prospectuses, and then going out to investors and developers and so forth saying, we have something for you. I think The reverse actually is actually quite challenging, because now the developer or the sponsor is doing all that work. And again, given the time frames that Steve was just mentioning, I find that difficult. So if I would say the one thing I would look for is, is that kind of prospectus saying like, and literally the towns reaching out to developers and saying, we've got something for you.
So on that shameless plug, the state does have an asset map which lists all the different zones and also layers within 67 layers each of the state resources and incentive programs that exist in each of these zones. So we're trying to make the process as easy for cities as possible to lift them up. So if you're an area in need of redevelopment, an urban enterprise zone, and also an opportunity zone, that's listed on the map. And to your point, there is nothing more important for cities to do than create this investment prospectus, because again, you're on a national stage. Everyone is looking to see what's being highlighted. And again, that's something that, shameless plug again, the state, especially through the Economic Development Authority, can help cities with. But I think to your point, that is so incredibly critical. Were you going to say something else?
Just to follow up on what Steve just said. As a code official, we found that investors and developers are actually reaching out to the communities to interview the departments. Yeah. My building department was interviewed twice from a very large firm wanting to make sure that we were capable of handling redevelopment projects within the community. So it's incumbent upon those that are going to be out there investing and have a project that's on the pipeline to make sure that the community is up to speed and can handle the project that you're putting forward. Forget all the other prior approvals. The fact is the community geared to handle the work that you're putting forward? And that's a big issue for those that are investing and those that want to develop.
The other thing is I'd applaud Elizabeth, I think, for identifying tracks which make economic sense.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and I've heard this from almost every client, is if your project doesn't pencil out without the opportunity zone tax incentives, they're not interested. This is an extra. Yeah. This is, shall we say, a safety cushion just in case something bad happens. But at the end of the day, they have to be projects that pencil out, because sophisticated investors are otherwise not interested. At least that's my experience.
Interesting. And Mark, on your end, what are you saying?
Well, obviously, from my end, most of the conversations are always tax-driven, right? But I applaud one client who we had a conversation with, and he was looking to the Atlantic City, coming more from the southern New Jersey area. And believe me, we joked about with somebody in here. In some cases, some people think North Jersey is another state. So they literally, we had a client say that he goes, I'm moving out of this state. We're in Marlton. He goes, I'm going back to North Jersey. And I looked at my other partner. I was like, you want to talk to him about this? But what is important also, and I think it's such an important part of this bill, is if the investors can get and look at this as not just a real estate tax thing, right, but a job creation,
absolutely,
and a business creation.
Absolutely.
Thing. That's where we have those conversations with them. And when you get that client that's really focused on that, it's a great feeling. And so that's the part from the city perspective that we see as their advisors from a tax perspective.
No, I think that's really helpful. And Eduardo, I think you got a ton of compliments. Mayor Bolwood will be happy. Yeah, Elizabeth is doing well. So that's really good. But just picking up on one of Mark's last points, he talked about the fact that while we look at opportunity zones, the majority of folks that look at it as a real estate play, but small businesses also are playing a really big role. Mm-hmm. And in the second set of regulations, they really teased out the opportunities for small businesses to play an active role and how we can also help them start up. So does anybody want to take on the small business role or talk about what's kind of happening in that space as well? Or have any of your clients looked at investing in businesses as an opportunity?
I don't have any right now, Stephen.
We haven't seen it, but look, the second set of regs definitely, I would say, to put it, sort of the way they kicked open the door for small businesses.
Absolutely.
It really did. And one of the reasons why is because, and Mark maybe can elaborate a little bit on this, is because leased property now can be in the opportunity zone. Yeah. And that's what really kicked open the door. So if you come in, you lease some space, and you put some improvements in, and now you populate that with your small business, that too can be an opportunity zone business and allow you to essentially enjoy many of these tax. I mean, most of this room and most of, frankly, what we've been doing, my guess is with this panel, has been real estate related. Mm-hmm. But understand, this legislation goes beyond real estate. It goes into businesses. So you could literally, start businesses, and I'll capitalize these businesses with improvements, technology, people, and so forth. And then when you go ahead and sell that business, maybe 10 years later, there could be a very, very, very interesting gain, for the founders of those businesses.
No, I would agree 100%. And please, Eduardo,
Oh, no,
jump in.
I was going to say, we have various mixed-use projects right now that are being under construction, and one of our challenges here, and Elizabeth, I don't know if it's a challenge, but a lot of the development has been basically one owner. One owner owned. They don't usually get investors coming in. However, it is something that we spoke to them about, that I had brought it up with them, especially for the mixed use, the small startups, that those could be opportunities to get a tenant in there, the right tenant you want on there. They can capitalize them instead of giving a lease break. So it is something we're exploring. And once the projects get done, I mean, that's good with the regulation on there also.
And I would say organizations like Launchpad have done a really good job in investing in small businesses, locating in one area and really building them up. And that's something with the innovation economy, really supporting small business, that the governor is doing as well. So small business for us, we're pushing through on that and hoping to get some more innovative businesses coming into the state. And so on that, we've been talking a little bit, I'm sorry, we're going to do question and answers at the end. Is that okay?
It's relevant to what you just said. My partner and I
And you have to give your name since you're going to interrupt my conversation. So now you got to give your name. Hi, Tony.
My partner and I are real estate investors. We're venture investors. So we have been following this part of the 2017 Act very carefully because we invest in medical science. New Jersey, as you know, is a plethora of medical science. My question to the panel is, we are about to pursue an investment in a company that's in a QOZ. Are there sufficient regulations at this point from the IRS to prudently pursue this, or are the regulations still so vague that there's a risk in doing something immediately?
Wow, I'd love to take that.
I know you did. I saw you leaning in. I saw you leaning all the way in.
Holy cow, Tony. All right, so this is all my years of experience, okay? I will tell you that I think it's great, and I would love to see that, because we're talking about, just like I mentioned a minute ago, about putting businesses, job creations, again, into these opportunity zones. But you have to remember what a proposed reg is. It's just out there. It's just a step above the instructions for government form. Okay, it really is. And I say that tongue in cheek a little bit, but it's the truth. We still need to get temporary regs that are issued on that. That'll give greater definition to what would qualify. I mean, we now have some guidance as to what amount of salaries would need to be working, what part of leases work. We now know triple net leases don't work and things of that nature. But you really, really have to be careful here. This will be the only time I'll stick up for the IRS, okay? And here's what I'm going to have to let you all understand if you don't know this. And you probably already do. IRS didn't write this law. Okay, Congress wrote this law. Mm-hmm. So the way that we get to a final regulation into the Internal Revenue Code is that the IRS, Chief Counsel, and all of the higher ups there, they have to interpret congressional intent. Well, after December 22nd they went scurrying like, cockroaches and rats running all over the place.
I love his analogy.
It would be great. It would be great to pull them back in and say, what did you mean? Because otherwise they're interpreting. And look no further than a huge piece of this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which dealt with the 20% deduction, a brand new code section 199A. And they issued their temporary regs. They went from the proposed to the temporaries right before their final. And in the temporary regs, they even called them reliance regulations. So get to the point, Mark, I know. It was right before April 15th, they put out the final regulations that contradicted the temporary regs. So what you had already filed some tax returns, you filed returns that were different than the final regs came out. So I don't think you're there yet, Tony. I think you've got to keep an eye on it. I wish I could tell you that the temps are now going to go, the proposals are going to go into temps in another week or two or a month or something like that. But I'd hate to see you invest your capital and then come to find out that it's not what I wanted.
So
You know
let me
what I mean?
push back on that really quick, Mark, because in the second tranche of regulations, they talked about the 3 safe harbor provisions specifically for businesses, which this could be included in and under. So I push back
Good.
gently on the tax attorney just to say that there are 3 safe harbor provisions that do allow for folks to invest in businesses in QOZs. And so there's a guy right there, John Costello, who works over at NJEDA, and his whole focus has been on the business component, so he can walk you through that process. But especially because you're focusing on this particular specific space with New Jersey medical devices, that's something that we're doing over at NJEDA. So just make sure you connect with John on that. So that's good. And I will never push back on you again, Mark, but for that one, I meant to make sure I had
and
to.
you should. It's a matter of the fact that they can change.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's clearly that second tranche did talk about the businesses. You and I mentioned that earlier today, Tony.
And so we're going to pull back, and I want to talk to really Steve K, Steve J, Mark, and then you can also chime into Eduardo, just about the type of funds that are being created. So one, since you're working specifically with funds, how are these funds being created, and what type of funds are you seeing created? I know there's a lot of technicalities that go behind that, but if you could walk us through that process, that would be great.
I think Mark already mentioned it. Let's take the easiest one. No, seriously, because I think it's the most common right now, and that's probably why he's seeing a lot of them. Self-directed fund.
Yeah.
You're a high net worth family, and you're just interested in, and literally this is almost as simple as forming an LLC, putting some, a little statutory language in there that's actually not very, very complicated, and go ahead and literally invest, in your QOZ. And it can be that simple if it's self-directed and if you're not relying on other people and you're completely comfortable with some proposed regs and you sort of have a little bit of risk tolerance in the particular area. I would say that's on one side of the spectrum. Let me take you to the other side of the spectrum here where I've just completed one. This is one I mentioned before. 75 investors,
Wow.
broker-dealer-led solicitation, literally a limited partnership agreement that was about 65 pages long with what they call a PPM, a private placement memorandum, that was at least 80 pages long. And if you want to know about risk factors because of proposed regulations, and at all the risk factors you would see in a kind of a ground-up development, which is very, very difficult, add to that tremendous number of tax risk factors associated with that. And that's why you end up with that kind of complexity, and then you have a bunch of constituencies sort of weighing in on that. So we're seeing the entire spectrum here in terms of people. And I think I was just talking to Blackstone just came up with $1 billion plus fund. To me, that's unbelievable because I think because frankly. I mean, the new regs talk about multi-asset strategies here, but they're still incomplete, and in the that's a much more complex conversation. But just the catchphrase here is that if you have a fund that has multiple properties in it, it's still it got a lot better with the second set of regs. There's still a little bit of uncertainty about how whether you can sell those, on a property by property basis and still enjoy all the benefits of this. That's the kind of thing we have to work with your tax advisors very, very carefully, particularly at the end point, until these regs come out. But I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's really helpful. And the other type of funds that are being created. So we saw recently that Ron Bate, right from New Jersey with Teachers Village, also just announced the creation of a fund. So he's got mixed-use housing that supports teachers, which is really, really exciting and is taking that nationwide. But there's tons of funds that people are also creating, ones that are looking at apprenticeship models, ones that are looking at, early childhood education by building buildings in these low-income communities. So what other type of creative funds are you guys seeing? Steve, are you seeing anything across the nation with different types of funds that are being created?
Not me. Nuts and bolts, not investing. No.
Well, Steve and Mark, are you guys seeing anything that's more creative? I know we're trying to push things forward, looking at things as creative even as offshore wind. So are there any other type of exciting funds that you guys are seeing?
Yeah. The only other, so first, as Stephen said, most of everything that I am seeing is real estate invested. Okay, that's primarily been with the one. The case study of our real client was real estate funds. They mentioned that Blackstone just created theirs. Morgan Stanley just created one. Wells Fargo private placement, select groups, they just created one too. But I have one client who, and I kind of applaud him, Ty, because it's along what you're thinking about. He's looking in the Atlantic City area about possibly getting both a wind and solar type of fund put together, and because he has a gain that he could put into here, and then the question then becomes, okay, who's going to set up this fund for me? How do I get about doing that? So my partner, Mike Greenwald, and I, we were talking with him up in New York, and we said, look, we'll make introductions. We've got contacts to do that. Steve would be a great one. And he's very, very excited, and he's going about now starting the process of looking into that. So I think that there's one that's very interesting to me to see if he takes this thing off now and funds it, because I think that would be a great one for everybody.
That's really helpful. So, Steve, this is going to be for you. This is the nuts and bolts one. Are you ready for this one?
I'm ready. I got copious notes here. We're good to go.
The potential of opportunity zones have captured the attention of many, and there are now convenings almost weekly where information is being shared and where investors are hearing from cities and states about investable projects. However, zoning, entitlement, permitting often take time, whereas OZ tax incentives encourage speed. What kind of things are policy practitioners, those that deal with the nuts and bolts, helping municipalities do to ensure that they are prepared?
Okay, so let's look at this from a couple different standpoints. We've talked about the investment side of it, but we haven't talked about the practical side of it.
That's right.
What do you do when you want a project to move forward? Now, I copied down some quick notes as far as some of the prior approvals that people have to go through in order to get a project to move forward. We talked about the master plan. You're dealing with either a planning or a zoning board. The difference between the two boards is the planning board is the board of permitted uses. So if you know you have a project that's already approved, you're going to the planning board. If not, you're off to the zoning board, which could add and complicate matters. Some communities, those that are savvy, those that know are supporting development, deal with technical review committees that gives an opportunity for a developer or an investor to come in first to speak to those individuals and say, listen, we're looking at putting this project forward. Give us an idea where you think we should go with this. And quite frankly, it's a dance. For those of you that have appeared before boards or have participated in board reviews, very rarely does a developer ever come in with the project that they want to develop. And seriously, you only get one bite at the apple, okay? You usually end up seeing a project that's much larger than what a developer really needs in order to make it work properly. And then you end up with the dance between the board, the administration, and the developer or their professionals to see where you finally end up with the project. Now, some of the trade-offs that you can get in these things are maybe an increase in density for more public space, an increase in height. There are things that you can do within the boards that help move a project forward. But as far as prior approvals are concerned, here's just a small list of some of the things that you're seeing. Soil conservation, huge issue. Historic, health departments, the county planning board. Don't forget, we've got another level of review that has to go through the county level. NJDOT, if you're anywhere near a DOT property, or an NJ Transit, if you're anywhere near a transit facility. Okay? All of the utility companies have to give reviews. Department of Health, if you're putting anything in there that has anything having to do with health, you're dealing with them as well. On the process to move the project forward, here's a couple of things that I'll throw out there that you may want to take advantage of, is the opportunity to deal with partial releases for projects that are out there. If you're fast-tracking a development, there's nothing that can stop you from getting permits for footings, foundations to move your project forward prior to the complete design. Now, this saves an awful lot of time as you're moving forward. You may have a concept, you may know what the building is going to look like, but you may not have completed the project as far as final architecturals are concerned. Having a partial release gets you a foot in the door and gets you a shovel in the ground to get the project started. That could be a huge incentive for you. The other thing that's a pitfall that you have to be very careful of is permit funding in communities. Now, the Department of Community Affairs has not taken a position with regard to permit fees as it relates to opportunity zones. That's something you may want to ask the question of, because quite frankly, maybe better to ask forgiveness than permission. And the reason I say this...
I cannot hear these things, and I stand here as part of the state government.
But I'm no longer state government, so I can say these things. But seriously, if you're doing new construction, the state values a permit based on cubic footage, not value, okay? So there's a huge difference in the way that permit fees are calculated. Whether you buy a $39 toilet at Home Depot or a $6,000 Toto toilet makes no difference. It's the size of the building that toilet is going into under new construction that makes the difference, okay? And lastly, you have to be careful when you're going in for your permits and when you intend to fund your project. And I say that for a variety of reasons. The most important is this: municipal governments work on a year-end cycle, which means if you're coming into me with a permit on December 1st, and that permit is going to generate a considerable amount of revenue, that money is gone December 31st, which means I no longer have the money to fund your construction projects as far as inspections are concerned. So from a timing standpoint, phasing a project is often more beneficial for the investor and certainly more for the department that's doing the inspections. And finally, I'll close on this. In some cases, financing of a project is tied to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, okay? It is crucial that when you file for your projects, you get a very finite timeline as to what portion of a project you are asking for the certificate for, because there is a succinct list of things that have to be completed prior to the issuance of a CO. And if funding is contingent upon the issuance of a CO, and you don't have these prior approvals complete, I legally cannot issue you the CO. So that, you could have the moving van sitting in the parking lot, and I've got to tell you, you're not getting a certificate to occupy. Now, does it come down to a cost of doing business where you get a daily fine for me, which is less than what you're losing in a business expense? Certainly, it happens. But these are the things, the nuts and bolts side of it, that you have to take into consideration when you're moving a project forward. Also, lastly, the prior approval issue. The state took a position that the plan review process can take place while prior approvals are still waiting. It's not the same for residential. Residential, you need board and planning approval prior to starting your plan review. But in commercial or non-residential projects, you can have the review process take place concurrent or while you're waiting for other prior approvals to come in. And in some cases, that can save you months on an approval timeline. So make sure that when you're putting your team together, you go and meet with the building department, you go and meet with the zoning department, you get all of your contacts done long before you come in and drop an application off on the table. All right? Technical review committees are your godsend. That's your lifeline into a community. You want to make sure that you've done all of this work first before you go and bring in a permit. It will save you a considerable amount of time in review, in headaches, and troubles down the line. So how was that?
Steve J, that was actually really helpful, I think, across the board. One of the things that we're realizing with so many municipalities, and Eduardo, please feel free to jump in, is there's this whole process. There's the A, oh, we're in an opportunity zone census tract. How do we get to Z? Everything that Steve just mentioned, and I apologize, but I get really excited. Everything that he just mentioned is so critical to this process. Nothing is going to move forward with municipalities or planning if these dots are not, if the I's aren't dotted and the T's aren't crossed, none of this is going to go forward. And so for us on a state level, we look at municipalities, how prepared they are, how really shovel-ready the projects are. Does any of this resonate with you, Eduardo? And are you guys moving in that same way, creating teams for opportunity zones that have their zoning, their planning, all those officials in the same rooms that you guys are taking this up?
I am, fortunately or unfortunately, I am in charge of all of those different bureaus, so it really is one-stop shopping. I oversee the zoning planning board, construction department, economic development. So I literally am the one person that covers all of that.
Are you hiring?
No. Steve J just taught me a couple things over here. I've only been doing it 5 years, so I'm definitely learning from this panel. But I wanted to build on what he said also. Tax abatements, if you come in for the pilot, you cannot touch the ground until the tax abatement has done 2 readings at City Council plus the 20 days. So you may have everything in place. If you still haven't negotiated your tax abatement, you cannot break ground. So I think that's one more item on there also.
No, and I think I also got a lesson from Steve J as well with the Department of Community Affairs and our permitting fees. But to your point, I think one of the things the state is trying to do is really align all of our resources for opportunity zones. So while we have this period of time to really operate in that manner, and that is something that we can and should be working on. I know with a lot of our state programs, the new incentives programs coming out of EDA have all built-in opportunity zone bonus points. The same thing for HMFA. They've also given additional bonus points if you're building an opportunity zone. So from the state's perspective, we want to make sure that we're supercharging all these areas that have been designated as well. But to your point, Steve, and I cannot say this enough, cities have to be prepared with that. And I think even for developers coming in, for the investors coming in, if they know that you guys have your zoning, your planning, all your permits set and ready to go, that just makes the process so much easier. Would you agree for that too, Steve, for your clients?
if anybody has a shovel-ready project out there, please come, because I think this is perfect for the opportunities. And I think, honestly, the long litany, which you just mentioned, really suggests, in a way, that at least for opportunity zones, shovel-ready projects are very, very valuable and would be wonderful if they have it. And that, unfortunately, that's not, I think, ground-up development doesn't always work that way. But but anyway, that's what definitely suggests. And I'm sorry, what was your question?
Well, we're gonna quickly pivot from that, and I'm gonna pivot just for a second, because again, I started out saying this, but really the impetus behind this is really to drive investments into distressed and rural communities. And so just across the board, taking off your business hats, but really focusing on the intent behind opportunity zones. What are some of the steps that we can do in these different positions to ensure that a lot of the wealth that is being brought into these communities actually stays there? So right now, the IRS doesn't have the necessary guardrails to ensure that the investments are going to stay within that community. But how can we, being involved in these spaces, ensure that communities also see a benefit from this process with opportunity zones? And I'll take that down the line. Let's start with Steve.
It's very easy. You have to market yourself. No one is going to promote yourself as well as you can. And if you're not out there explaining to investors that you have opportunities available within your communities, that you're willing to work with the developers, support them, and encourage their development, responsible development within your communities, somebody else is. You have to be out in front of the curve. You have to self-promote. You have to get your information out there so that people understand you're willing and you want the projects.
Steve.
I think this is one of something, to your point, it sort of takes a village. And I'll give the example of it's Steve Katz in Newark, who has the incubator, the venture capital incubator that's sitting there in Audible's building. If you haven't seen it, it's unbelievable.
The new building?
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's great. And anyway, but the point being here is what one of his thesis for bringing in these new venture companies is that part of the culture there is to have the founders live there.
That's right.
Have the employees live there and create a sense of community and incentives so the workers. So once you have people living in your communities, then they start caring about your communities, and then the merchants come and everything, and I think it all follows. So right. I would say is drive it in a way that sort of creates that community and create incentives, whether it be from the government or and so forth, that sort of foster that sense of community.
And that's part of the Hire, Buy, Live program that the Newark Anchor Collaborative and all of the anchor institutions are part of. But Audible has done a really phenomenal job in ensuring, again, that those that are investing in the community also live there as well, and that they're also hiring locally, which is also a really important part of how to ensure that communities also have opportunities to build and keep wealth.
Teachers Village.
There you go.
Example, right?
Mark?
It's really hard to build on anything other than what you just heard, because quite honestly, for me, that's really what this should really all be about. Not just go in there and get in there and get out of there in 10 years and they take all the money, and then these communities are still in the same position they were 10 years ago. So it's just really critical to make sure that you say what you're going to do and you do it. And I guess maybe even if that's part of you talk about the private placement memorandum, maybe that's something to really define what your end goal is, and it's not just that tax deferral, not just the pulling the money out, and because job creations are going to be so important, and it's going to happen on the business end of things, just like Tony's talking about too.
And then I would say, again, I worked for mayors. I know cities so well, so you guys really are the heartbeat of what's happening with opportunity zones. So I'm going to pivot the question a little bit differently. How are you ensuring that the residents and that the community are involved in this huge process? And then, again, what else can cities be doing?
No, definitely. I mean, just to build off on the prior one, too, I think this is a great opportunity for a big halo effect also. I think a lot of investors over here were scared of certain areas coming into the city. We're seeing it right now behind the train station. 7 different parcels blighted for over 20-something years. The first guy came in using some EOZ money. We're now developing all 7 parcels for 1,000 units for the first time in 25, 30 years, or actually ever. And I think also with our tax abatements, we have first source agreements that they must hire, not must, but if they find a qualified person in town, they have to hire them there also. So I think that is something big over here. And the tracks that we picked, again, I keep on hitting it, were areas that were feasible in our opinion, and also the private sector, to get developed, but then also that can bring that halo effect, being the first one to coming in and being like, oh, look, that's hugely successful. Then the lots around it there, this and that, and you get the actual development. To me, it's all about getting that first guy in and showing everybody, yes, it's feasible, wildly successful, and then going from there.
Right, and just on that, so while we do have the Elizabeths and the Newarks and the Jersey cities that are getting a lot of national acclaim, there are smaller cities still that need to do a little bit more footwork. And I know Steve hit on some of these points, but what can some of these smaller cities do to attract the same type of investment and or attention, or like the type of investors that you're looking at right now?
Well, part of the problem that you have is the larger cities that have these tracts available. I think you said earlier that there's 75 communities and 169 tracts.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is going to be attention is being focused in the larger cities where, some of these smaller communities that have opportunity zones available to them need to get out and promote. Let the investors know that these areas are available and that they're willing to work with the community. There's a benefit for all parties involved, especially in some of the communities where competition might not be so great.
That's a good point. And I would just say on the process for selecting the zones, the governor was very intentional about making sure, again, that we had a transparent process with each one of the cities that has opportunity zone census tracts. We worked directly with the mayors to make sure that we had their input as well, so it wasn't a one-way street. So that was very important. And then we talked a little bit about transit. We did a transportation overlay. So if you're within a quarter of a mile of a transit hub, building off of the importance for the state, that was also taken into consideration. So each of the cities that we picked, from Perth, Amboy, all the way down to Bridgeton, there is something that we knew would be appealing for investors and also for the communities to really take part. So Steve, what else could these smaller, like Perth, Amboy type cities also be doing? Steve J gave some good points, but what would be your recommendations to them as well?
I mentioned it before.
Yeah.
Again, I think it is the marketing.
Yep.
And I think you have to create a reason for the project.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, but again, I come back to it has to pencil out.
Yep.
Right? So, if you're an industrial user and you have warehousing, it's because you're in a strategic location, and it makes a lot of sense. If you're a mixed use, there has to be a thesis there for the investment in order to make sense. And I just believe that the communities have to drive that thesis. I don't think I think the developer is going to take the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be in the big cities. And when it's not low-hanging fruit, we got to go out there and we got to make that happen.
And Elizabeth, of course, has their maps here. And how many census tracts did you guys have that were opportunity zones?
5.
There you go, making sure he's ready.
Yes.
Okay, and so on this, we're about to come to a close and open it up to Q&A, but I wanted to give the panel one last chance to give just some closing remarks. Again, this is such a huge process. This is a law that nobody's ever seen before. There are things that are happening. Again, you're building a plane while you're flying it at the same time, trying to get development out, making sure that you have the right type of investments, make sure your funds are together. So there is a checklist of things that have to be done that go along with opportunity zones. So while people see the big splashy headlines, there's so much more detailed, so much more technicalities. It's so much more nuanced than anything else we've ever seen, but there's also a ton of opportunity. So in closing, give me your final thoughts, good, bad, or ugly, on opportunity zones. We'll start with Steve.
So I see it from a different perspective. I see an opportunity, or a gap, I should say, on the municipalities' end. Mm-hmm. I know for a fact that the code officials, zoning boards, planning boards, to some extent, aren't being exposed to these opportunities that are out there. And I actually made notes to reach out to DCA after this is over to talk about training opportunities for the code officials so they're brought up to speed to understand what is coming down the line. Because
we will take you up on that offer immediately.
Yeah. Because I see this as being a potential problem for us.
Agreed.
If we're not up to speed in the approval process, then you're going to get bogged down as the investor. And then what ends up happening? It becomes a vicious cycle of a lot of finger pointing and yelling and screaming. If we're educated and we can move ahead and help you in the investment process and move the development along, everybody works out better because guess what? There's no complaining and you've got ratables on the tax rolls. So I'll work on it from my end.
Are you going to operate also with all the 565 other municipalities? We got 75 for opportunity zones, but as New Jersey goes.
We have Rutgers DCA training, so we'll make sure we get that on the list of things to do. So it may be tapping into some of our panelists here to do some training for us.
Okay. And Steve, you guys have done a phenomenal job over at Sills, really helping your investors get things figured out. We're the first ones to really take a bite at the apple, have your own blog as well. Is there anything else that you'd want to close with or that we haven't touched on that you'd want to from the Sills perspective or the investor side as well?
being the guy that does the fund formation, I would just say pull your team together.
Yep.
And fast. And people were happy to talk for free about it, by the way, if you're just thinking about it. And I mean that. And what I mean by that is this is a matrix of a lot of regulation and professionals that are needed. And just to name a few is, to get your capital stack. Now you're just dealing with equity and you're dealing with debt. Of course, amongst that, now you're dealing with securities regulation, tax regulation, not just OZ, partnership tax, et cetera, et cetera. You're dealing with the 40 Act, the Advisor Act, environmental law,
That's right.
land use law.
That's right.
Keep going on. Now we got to get incentives. You have to deal with people who have access to the government officials and so forth. It really, really takes a team, to pull these projects together. And I think that, so at the outset, is if you have the idea, you have the motivation, is work on getting your team, have that initial kickoff conversation.
Right.
And, and I think that's where you, just like conversations like this, you start bantering around the ideas and you start coalescing around a strategy. And I think that's my big takeaway.
I could not agree with you more. That's really helpful. Are we going to have a positive ending comment?
Always. I promise. This is a great opportunity. There's the word again. We should have a drinking game probably, right? Every time we had an opportunity. My partner Chris would have won
10
that
o'clock
though.
in the morning, it's good.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Put a team together. Don't do this alone.
Right.
If you've got questions, make sure you're with the right advisors. Because once this thing gets running and gets up and running and we get final regulations, this is something that probably is one of the best, there we go, opportunities that the code has put in place in a long time. It's not just deferrals. It's really gain exclusions. It's really subsequent appreciation exclusions. And for me, the greatest takeaway, the greatest benefit of this whole thing is, listen, we are all blessed in this room, and we're all very well-to-do, and we're happy. We've got great families. We need to take care of our communities that are less fortunate too. And for me, that's the takeaway for this thing. If this is going to be successful, that's where we're going to win, and we all win.
And Mark closed us with church, so I appreciate that. And last but certainly not least, Eduardo Cities, again, we've been stressing this plays such a huge role. Just some closing thoughts on your role in this and just the Opportunity Zone legislation itself.
Sure. No, I'm very, very excited. We put a lot of time into this over here, and building off of what Ty said, I feel it's my responsibility not just to, and also the cities, to get the low-hanging fruit also done and actually developed, to really use that, leverage the Opportunity Zone and everything else we have here, and get those areas that haven't been developed for the longest time ever. And I think with this legislation, the help of the state, it's really filing for the first time for urban areas an actual possibility on here. So I think it's more than just doing the low-hanging fruit one. So that's why I'm really excited for it. And just going forward, we just need the final regs to come out finally. So
They will.
There is one more set of regulations that are set to come out. So the
So,
third
yes.
tranche of regulations is pending. So you really are, literally, we've said it over and over, building a plane, flying it at the same time. But I just have to give, and ask you guys to join me in giving a round of applause for this amazing panel that we have here. And I would just say, while we have such subject matter experts at the table, if people have questions, we've got about 10 minutes available for questions, so we would love to be able to answer them. Okay. We have a question right up in the front.
And for the record, if anybody asks my wife, I was listed as a subject matter expert. Just may not happen at home, but
And can you just please state your name and the company you're with, please?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Bradshaw. I'm the Public Information Officer for the City of New Brunswick, head of the Office of Mayor Jim Cahill. Census 2020 has already started for those of us in municipal government, and one of the things that's happening in municipalities is they are proposing redrafting of some of the census tracts. This may be a question best suited for you, Ms. Cooper, or for whoever. Some of those tracts obviously are designated opportunity zones and have already been set as opportunity zones. I just want to know if anyone has a little knowledge as to what happens if one of our tracts gets broken up, reset, what happens to the opportunity zone designation there?
So and again, I'll turn to the panel of experts because this isn't a question I think that I've heard or seen before, but the designated boundaries of those census tracts are the ones that were certified by U.S. Treasury. So that is the finite decision. So if things change per or after census, what was submitted, those guidelines, is what we're operating for the next 10 years. And so that was something that U.S. Treasury set up and that they approved. So those specific zones, those specific boundaries that create that census tract would be the ones that we followed up in, because you can't have people investing for 10 years. There's changes to that particular tract, and those investments aren't upheld. That would never, I can't see that happening, but again, stranger times have happened.
Yeah. No, I think they're
Yeah.
grandfathered, actually.
Yeah.
Ty, you're absolutely right. The ones that are in there are going to be definitely held for at least a 10-year period.
That's a great question.
Hi, my name is David Hutter. I'm a reporter at NJBIZ. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around all of this, of course, but especially the regulations as it relates to having final clarity regarding the opportunity zones. Which branch of the federal government will be saying, here they are? And now that 1 year and 6 months have passed, when do you think we will receive them? Thank you.
So I leave that to the tax experts on that end. And Mark, you cannot get quiet now.
Tomorrow. They'll be out tomorrow. It's really a loaded question because, quite honestly, a law should not have been signed December 22nd of 17, and we're still sitting here with proposed regulations, right? Having said that, they are talking about, as Ty mentioned, about issuing another set. So I believe this is what's going to happen here. This train's going to happen just like the 199A code section that came about. This will turn rapidly. So I think we're going to end up seeing the temporary regs go right into the proposed, going right into the temporaries, and the finals will finish up with typically, as they mostly do, under an FAQ type of format. So I think you're going to get a lot of clarity to this thing pretty quickly. How quickly? I'd be a fool to answer that. I've been around doing this way too long, but I don't, we're not going to wait another year and 6 months, that's for sure.
And Mark, to answer David's question, also with Treasury, right, is driving this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
U.S. Department of Treasury.
Yes.
Yep. They're the ones that issue the regs.
And they're the ones that certified all the tracts once the governor submitted them. So the governors from each state had to submit them to the U.S. Department of Treasury in order for the actual zones to be certified. And they're the ones that have been issuing all of the regulations as they've been coming out. And right now, I think is still open or public comment as well after the second set came out. So it's still public comment right now. So there's a lot moving, yes. There's my friend again. Hi, Tony.
This time it's Tony Soprano. My question deals with the hidden initiation fee that is never discussed. So, give you an example. I have $1 million deferred gain in my Berkshire Hathaway stock. If I put it into a QOZ, I get a lot of benefits, both from a deferral, a 15% exemption, and then ultimately the enterprise that I invest in, if that turns out to be profitable, that's a tax-free event. But the state of New Jersey wants its piece, and I presume that check is up front. So, one, is the state of New Jersey planning to do anything similar to what the feds have done? Is Cory Booker, who is a New Jersey senator who has got his name on this bill, going to promote a benefit in the state of New Jersey? If not, there is a hidden initiation fee of some magnitude on my Berkshire Hathaway gain, which makes me pause whether I want to do this or not. Comments, anyone?
Ty, we could probably
Move
take
to
this
Florida or
together.
Texas. It's real simple there. Real simple. No state income tax.
Yeah. Or like my other client said, I'm gonna move to North Jersey. So I mean, however you want to do it, really. But
So
you're
I'll
already
start
there.
with my panelists. I'll start with Steve K. and then Mark.
Look, you're absolutely right, Tony. No, it is. I think that I think the states that are really, shall we say, putting out the red carpet on this program are getting on board with that and are, effectively putting their own opportunity zone regulations into, or thinking about, I should say. I'm not aware of actually what done, but is, to match the federal program. So it's a pure, deferral. I don't know what New Jersey is, Ty, doing.
So New Jersey right now is in conformity. In order to go out, we'd have to decouple, which we have not done just yet. That's my answer. I'm sticking to it. It may change, but for right now, that's how New Jersey is positioned. So the other competitive states that we do see, we're clear on that. What we have seen other states do is that they'll either decouple, or the way that they will conform will be for certain projects. So if you're investing in affordable or workforce housing, you'll get the same federal tax benefit for those specific projects. If you're investing in offshore wind, you'll get the benefit for that specific project. And so that's, again, how some other states are operating. We're looking into those, but right now we are in conformity. I think Sills Cummis published an issue, actually. You guys published a blog on us being in conformity.
We've been pushing.
Good morning. My name is Robin Lapidus, and I'm the Executive Director of the Flemington Community Partnership, which is a business improvement district. And we are a one census tract, 100% opportunity zoned borough. So we're not a city. We're a borough. I'm not sure if we're the only borough that's not a city, or large or small, but this is a slightly shameless marketing plug.
This is the time to do it.
I know. We are following your advice with rapt attention. We've identified, 20 areas for development. We're working really closely with our county chamber and our county economic development team, and they're awesome. And we're having our first Opportunity Zone Summit on July 11th in Flemington. But my question is, in a lot of ways, we have amazing affordable and diverse housing, we have a fabulous quality of life, and we have great health care. But we don't have as much connection to venture cap or to, the innovative incubator kind of financiers. So what would be your best recommendation as a borough with ripe for investment to get more connected to those people, to invite them to our summit on July 11th? End of shameless plug.
I like your style. So I'll turn it over to the panel, and then I've got some suggestions how the state can also help. So
I think you just did.
I want this to be the best $25.
Well, have you reached out to other developers, other parties who have already done stuff inside of your town? I think that's a good base to start, and they work sometimes with word of mouth when they start running and everything like that on there. Neighboring towns also, because I know developing is local. It's also big, but it's also very local, so I think that's a good base to start there. You could use the NGRA, who's we're using also, but that's what would come to my head right now.
A couple things I would just add on that the state are helping with. So Department of Community Affairs, I caught that. Department of Community Affairs, the New Jersey Redevelopment Authority, and the Economic Development Authority are going out to cities, as they call this, doing a full-on, all-scale, help or build out for municipalities. So DCA is identifying what specific type of projects they have. We're working on our new incentive plans over at EDA, and also HMFA with their low-income housing tax credits, and also helping to build out capacity. One of the things we're recognizing is that, especially with some of the smaller cities, while they have tremendous resources, it's still a capacity need. And so DCA is doing a really great job on helping to build out that capacity. EDA is also doing a digital marketplace where we're connecting investors to cities, to pipeline projects, not pushing any particular projects, but really having a website interface. So again, investors, cities, and projects can all meet in one space. And then we also have an innovation challenge where EDA is putting up $500,000 as a competitive process for cities to apply for, so they can help to build out their investment prospectus. And again, for you guys, I think it's incredibly important and smart that you guys are doing a forum so early out. I haven't seen any other municipalities and or boroughs do something specifically to track investors. What I would also do is on the Novogradac, on their website, they list all of the 200 funds that have been created. And so I would look at that list and start doing cold calls. I know it sounds weird, but if you know you have your pipeline projects that are ready to go, you've got all your permitting per Steve J ready and lined up, then then that's a good opportunity. Have your mayor become really invested, and then also create an internal council within your borough so that there's one person that's accountable. So whenever the calls come in, whenever the investors are looking, or whenever the state is offering resources, there's one point person that's being held accountable for that role. And again, for you, July 11th, announcing that here, knowing that you've got this great panel, I think was a great opportunity. And Steve J. has a comment.
And just for future, if you're going to do this again, I would suggest reaching out to the League of Municipalities.
Yeah.
They are always looking for articles for their publications, and they're very good about promoting municipalities, especially if they have something coming up. So give them far enough in advance lead time, and they'll be happy to put something together for you.
And I would say John Costello, my coworker, is right back there. He is helping to lead the charge for EDA, so make sure you get his card. But we have gone out to municipalities that have asked us to help. So it's a whole team of EDA, NJRA, DCA, DEP who's now involved, and really help build up capacity. And go onto our website, opportunityzones.nj.gov. Shameless plug. You can go onto that website, but just to see where the assets are listed. But we also have community resources that are listed on our state website as well. It's a one-stop shop for resources, but you can have a direct contact with the state as well. And we're just going to go right in the back. Oh, right there. There you go. Sorry.
I'm Jeff Rosen with Red Rose Improvements. You were talking, I'm not sure, it might have been Steve, about some type of a pseudo checklist of different things we need to kind of consider. Is that something that you or anybody in the panel has that we can have access to?
I think that was Steve J.
Well, if you go on to the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs website, if you go under the Uniform Construction Code, and the tabs are on the page itself, one of the bulletins in the back of the construction code has a list of prior approvals. So there's a prior approval list, which is not all inclusive because communities have additional things that are on it. But there also is a list on there of the conditions of a certificate of occupancy. So you get the beginning of the process and you get the end of the process, which tells you what you need to do up front and what you need to complete prior to the issuance of a certificate. And it has both the things that you can get a temporary on and things that you absolutely cannot get a temporary on. So if you may find that useful, but it is the DCA webpage.
And I would say for local planning services, Maria Connolly is incredibly helpful, and I believe her email is maria.connolly@dca.nj.gov, or Christopher Wheeler. They're the ones that are kind of leading the Opportunity Zone efforts for the Department of Community Affairs, and his is christopher.wheeler@dca.nj.gov.
Hi, my name is Anthony Marin, and I'm with MIG Real Estate. We're a real estate company focusing in Newark and Elizabeth. So we're in the process of putting our team together to open up an opportunity zone. And the focus of all the conversation that at least I'm hearing are investors that are looking to utilize their capital gains. What about investors that are looking to put new money to work that are not capital gains? Does the opportunity zones have any benefits for those type of investors?
I would say so absolutely, and I would say just on the state incentive side, for all of the designated opportunity zone census tracts, there's additional bonus points that have been included. So again, I mentioned the Housing Mortgage Finance Agency with their low-income housing tax credits, for the New Jersey Economic Development Authority for our new programs, the new ERG, Forward and Aspire. Those programs are based upon the Opportunity Zone legislation, so those census tracts are built in for additional bonus points. And also the way the state is stacking things, all of our UEZ programs, all of our areas in need of redevelopment are actually built into that. So that was part of the selection process that we used when we were selecting our Opportunity Zone census tract. So all of these state resources were already built into that project. So even if it's not the same type of capital gains that you would get the same benefit on, you'll still receive the benefits from the incentive side that the state is providing. And then again, with Mark and with Steve, please add on.
Although I'd say one concern I have is whether or not you can invest non-capital gains into a QOZ. So I think that's something I can get back to you on that, but I'm not sure you can actually.
I think you can, and I think you can, but of course what you're losing out on there is the fact that there's no tax benefit for you on the 10 or 15% break. The other problem or caveat that you would say is, you want to make sure, the reason you're going to get into that is some of the incentives that Ty talked about that you would get. If you're looking for that 10-year hold, you got to make sure that the fund's going to be around for 10 years too, or more than. Otherwise, any appreciation of what's going in there, you're not going to get the benefit for, right? So
the question is, if you did hold it for the 10 years, you would get the benefit.
right now, the way it's written, I believe that is true. But again, let's follow these regulations. But right now, I think that is, because remember, if you go back to the example that we talked about, you have $1 million asset in your hands that you sold for $2 million. You could take the $1 million off the table and only put the $1 million gain in, or you could put the whole $2 million in, right? So that's very clear. You can put the whole thing in there. You just don't have to. It's one of the basic, let's call it nuances for a 1031 versus this. So based on that premise, I would say, yes, you would follow the regs, keep on doing it too. I do want to say one thing too, because Ty was so gracious. She said, give a panel. I've done many of these. I've done many seminars. Ty, you're one of the best moderators. You should get a hand clap for us.
Very nice. Now he's making up for it. Kidding. Are there any more questions? I saw a few more hands.
Yes, good morning. My name is Rui Almeida. I'm local from Newark. We start very early right after the law. We acquired 3 properties. Now we have 3 approved opportunity zone properties, and we under contract in another 15 properties next to the area in the South Ironbound section, and also in downtown Newark. I would love to as you know, since it was not enough information about that right when the law comes up, we come up with our own cash. We purchase that, we approve it, and now we're raising money for the construction. We just open up, matter of fact, when we change the properties after the approval to the Opportunity Zone Fund. That's very related to Anthony's question. We use private money to acquisition. Now we're going to use money from that we're going to be able to defer. The expectation is to hold for the long run. Mm-hmm. The question is how is the way to mingle that? Mingle in the way.
Commingling the funds?
The mingle the funds, what it is cash and what it is money that's going to be for the long term. Regarding leverage, if you guys ever see something about that, again, a very simple example, maybe then a lot of people have a question about that. We have a property we purchased for $3 million, then we approved 62 units, shovel ready in the South Ironbound section. Now we're gonna have to raise $10 million for construction. That $10 million from construction can be from funding that can be deferred, or what is your opinion about that? Because this is what we're concerned with right now. How are we going to do it? Like we have Opportunity Zone right across Rutgers for 296 units that is right across Rutgers campus. How are we going to do? Since day one, we have to be defer capital gains. Sorry about so many questions.
No, that's good. That's a Steve K. and Mark question/answer.
You got a lot packed into that question. let me just point one thing out, and I know Mark can elaborate more. You got to be very careful. There's a concept under the tax law called related party transactions. Be very, very careful about that. And what that basically says is you can't sell to yourself. And so in structuring your transaction for the purposes of bringing in investors, you need to structure it very carefully so you don't tripwire those kind of related party transactions, which would really squirrel your tax situation. So I'd say talk to Mark, talk to one of my tax partners to make sure you be very careful with the structuring. And obviously, insofar as deploying leverage, I mean, there's opportunities here because clearly what the law does allow you to do is leverage recaps. So you can pull some of your money out, and that's definitely possible. That's part of the new regs, which is really, really wonderful. Although, you got to, again, talk to your tax guy because you got to be careful about your basis and so forth and so on. And the other thing, just as an aside, for developers like yourself, there's also, I think, basically forgiveness in the depreciation. There's no depreciation recapture, which is a really amazing concept of this thing that's going on. So there's a lot of great benefits for folks like yourself who got in early. But please be careful because there's some real tripwires out there for folks like yourself. I don't know which advisors you're using, but I would say go back and before you take new money in, make sure you're structuring it in a way that's going to be able to take advantage, of this opportunity zone legislation. Particularly talk to them about, here's your word, related party transactions. It's something you got to be really careful about.
And I would just say you have such amazing subject matter experts up here too. While you have their ear, take it, get it, pull them aside afterwards. So, as they offer all your resources.
All our contacts there. Okay. Always reach out. Please feel free to reach out.
Are there any more questions? We've got time for about 2 more questions. You've had your hand up in the front for a long time. Can you just give her the microphone in the front? Thank you. Right here. There you go. Thank you.
Hi, Danielle DiGirolamo, Town of Phillipsburg. So we're in an opportunity zone as well as an urban enterprise zone. And we're in a unique situation. We have a large amount of abandoned and foreclosed properties, which is in comparison to the large industrial project that I'm sure most people in the state are aware of. We have an opportunity to bring a lot of new development to the area to replace that foreclosed abandoned property situation. I've been studying this for a long time because I happen to be in construction business as well. There are some fabulous prospectuses out there from other states, but the state of New Jersey has not put together a template of recommended prospectuses that municipalities can put out to send out.
Right.
I mean, I started developing my own because they always say don't agonize, plagiarize.
I may steal that.
As a politician, I can't say plagiarize. I should say adopt.
Borrow.
Adopt. Make it your own. So that's what I started doing. It's become quite lengthy. It's video, it's interactive. I think it's great. But is the state looking to have something to be a working template so I don't?
Absolutely. So part of what we're doing is again, knowing what we know and knowing what we don't know. So we have taken on national experts with the governance project. So part of the EDA challenge I mentioned earlier was the Opportunity Zone EDA challenge. And that's in partnership with the Governance Project, who provides technical assistance, who has done build-outs for numerous cities on Opportunity Zone Investment Prospectus. And so it's a challenge that we hope to launch within the next month or so. But if you reach out to us at DCA, NJRA, and I'm going to make sure you see John before he leaves, we will put you in contact with our staff. Again, the Office of Local Planning Services and the New Jersey Redevelopment Authority are partnering together to ensure that our cities that we selected have every resource they need. So it's just a matter of connecting there as well. We'll review it for you. We'll give you advice. We'll help you build it out as much as we possibly can. So again, there's state resources here, and then we also have a challenge that we're bringing in with the Governance Project as well. So John Costello, who's in the back, raise your hand. That's the guy you're going to see. And we have one last question. Go ahead, sir.
One selfless plug. I'm also from the state, New Jersey Clean Energy Program. A lot of the projects you're
feisty audience today.
A lot of the projects that you're considering are eligible for energy efficiency rates. I'll be in the back. Reach out to me. That's an economic benefit you should take advantage of.
No, absolutely. And we're working hand in hand with our Department of Environmental Protection as well. We started a new community-based program with them. CCI EDA gave $1 million for this program to spread this throughout the state. So that is incredibly important, especially considering the policy priorities of this governor. So that's a great shameless plug. But I want to have time for one more question. If there's one more question, not a plug, we've got one more opportunity. Yes, sir.
There just might be just an interesting date for some folks in the audience. Is Wednesday, July 9th. Sorry, Wednesday, July 9th is the third and hopefully last public comment hearing at IRS.
Thank you. Excellent point. Excellent. Say that one more time and say it louder, because we talked about these regulations in this public comment period, so this is incredibly important.
Wednesday, July 9th, suburban Maryland at an IRS office.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, we are done with all of our kidding. I'm kidding. Our Q&A.
Awesome. Great job. Thank you.
We're going to have closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ty. Thank you, Stephen Jones, Stephen Kamen, Mark Nicastro, and Eduardo Rodriguez. As always, we will have full coverage of this discussion on NJBIZ.com and in our weekly print edition. We also will post a video of these proceedings on our YouTube channel. We'd like to thank Kane AV for handling the video chores. If you want any more information about Kane, you can stop by the registration desk. If you can, please join us at our next discussion, which is on energy. That's on June 25th down at the Doubletree Hilton. I'm told that they also have a room that's an opportunity zone. So, frankly, wherever we are is an opportunity zone. I mean, let's face it. I hope to see you there. Thanks for coming, everyone.